Greetings. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Heart and Soul Broadcasting Services. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today I'm in conversation with his worship, the Mayor of Bulawayo, Senator David Coltart. If you enjoy this conversation, remember to subscribe, to like, and to share. Let's get down to some work. So, David, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Trevor, I'm so delighted that you've come all the way down to your hometown. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Fantastic. David, I was born here, like I said, born in Impilo Hospital, 1962. Grew up in Magwegwe, when it was still called the Dark City. Went to Magwegwe Primary School, went to Mziligazi High School, and then the University of Zimbabwe stole me. But my heart is still in the city. My parents' home is about 3 minutes away from here. So I love the city. So when I heard that David was going to take over running the city, with what I know about the city, my love for the city, and the mess that the city is in, I said, David must be crazy. Why did you take up this job?
Well, I think like you, fundamentally I love the city. Although I can't claim to have been born in the city like you. I was born in Gwiru. I've lived here since 1961. I was raised here. My entire soul is here. My family lives here. 2 of my children, 5 of my grandchildren are here. And I've seen the city slowly deteriorate in the course of the last few decades. And when you get to your mid-60s, you want a bit of a legacy. You want to leave something for your kids and your grandchildren. And so when I was asked to do this job, although I knew it was a poison chalice, I thought I'd give it a full go.
What in your mind said to you, I'm taking this job, the biggest challenge is going to be A, B, C, D? What were the 3 challenges for you as far as taking the job was concerned?
Well, I understood, first of all, that this is a ceremonial position. I'm not an executive mayor. I'm a ceremonial mayor. I'm a lawyer, and I understand that there are very limited powers, legal powers, that mayors have in this country now. So I understood that would be a problem. Secondly, I understand that there's very low morale amongst councillors, low morale amongst even management, because people are not paid what they should be. And then thirdly, of course, I understood that there'd been years and years of neglect of the infrastructure. The roads are simply the outward manifestation of the deeper malaise in the city, our water distribution network. So I understood all of that. But I have to say that having been in the job for a year, almost a year now, I didn't realize just how bad the situation was.
You didn't realize just how bad the situation was. Just sum it to us. How bad was the situation when you came in?
Well, everywhere you turn, there are problems. We have 8 sewage plants. They're running at 20% capacity. We deliver between 100 and 150 megalitres of water per day to the city. We are only processing 10 megalitres of water per day through our sewage system. So that is one example. The roads are obvious. We have huge debt. $51 million is owed to the city by ratepayers. And of course, a theme that we'll come back to, our water situation is absolutely critical, in a critical state.
Water is going to take a bit of our time, but there's a lot of other issues that we want to cover. You've raised an issue that's important for us to understand, which is you're a ceremonial mayor. How much has that hindered your being able to be effective? And going forward, I mean, you still have another 4 years or so. How much do you think that's going to be a hindrance in terms of your ability to deliver on your passions and your agenda?
Well, whilst we've got a great team, a great management team here, the fact of the matter is that mayors in this country now have no hard power. They can't say that will be done. One has plenty of soft power, particularly if you've got a higher profile in social media and similar forms of media. In that way, you can say what your goals are, and that carries with it some weight. But ultimately, you can't simply determine this is going to be the course of action to be taken. And in that way, it stands in marked contrast, for example, to when I was Minister of Education. As Minister, you have absolute power, you control your ministry, obviously within the confines of Cabinet, whereas here there's a far more limited power. And it's compounded by the fact that, for example, I'm paid $47 a month as mayor.
When you first said it, I didn't believe that.
That's the reality. I'm paid an allowance of $47 per month, but our councillors are paid even less. And so there's very low morale amongst councillors. It means that councillors are constantly foraging for ways of supplementing income. So we spend far too much time, for example, on workshops than we do on the practical day-to-day work that needs to be done. Because without workshops, councillors can't survive. So there are these problems that we face.
That breaks my heart. Without workshops, councillors can't survive. And that you're getting paid $47. Can we just dwell on that? I mean, what's the impact of that in the way the city gets run?
Well, one can't just look at the payment in isolation. The major problem is, in fact, the change from executive mayors to ceremonial mayors. It means that mayors and councillors have to have at least two jobs. And quite frankly, they need a job outside of being mayor as their principal source of income and the principal consumer of their time. It means that there is relatively limited amount of time that can be applied to running a city. Compare that, for example, to cities in South Africa, Cape Town, for example. There you have executive mayors. Their full-time job is running the city, and it reflects in their delivery. We don't have the same in this country, and it really is something that government needs to look at.
It's something that government needs to look at, but perhaps the people that are in this room ought to be pushing on that point, because my sense is that local government is in the coalface of service delivery. Therefore, we should have the best amongst us running city councils. We should have a mayor who knows what he's talking about, who is informed, who is educated, who's an expert and that kind of stuff, and a group of councillors who understand that. And my sense is that we're weakening local government by removing the executive role, as it were. Would that be your sense? What pushback would you give to me on that?
No, absolutely. You know, if I could devote 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to this job, there's no doubt that we would achieve a lot more. But I come back to the other thing. You can't just make an executive power with an executive mayor with limited powers. You've got to give mayors the powers, the legislative powers that they used to have.
And understand that mayors and councillors are another platform, another tool of service delivery to an entire constituency, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, let's look at it at a national level. If you think of our 5 or 6 principal cities and their contribution to the GDP of this country, one of the reasons the country's economy is struggling is because our cities are struggling. If we get our cities running efficiently, we'll transform the entire nation.
And back to my theme about nation building, the nation is built by all of us, all cities pumping at full steam, every citizen being allowed to do what they ought to be doing. And sadly, I think our conversation is teeing up the challenge here that perhaps our cities are not being allowed to do what they should be doing in terms of contributing to nation building. David, like I said when we started, I've known you for a long time. And I know the character that you are. You are a fierce person. You speak your mind. You have very few sacred cows. How has it been sitting in this role and holding back the David that I know and projecting the mayor of Bulawayo, who is not always David Coltart?
Well, let me put it negatively first before I go into the positive. Negatively, it's arguably the worst job I've ever had because I've got goals and I'm finding it very difficult to achieve those goals. But on the positive side, I've found that despite the problems, I've been buoyed, and I think the entire council has been buoyed by the goodwill of the people of this great city and the staff. I've found incredible gems in our staff. We have some amazingly strong departments, people who respond, where I've asked that things get done and they get done immediately. And that's refreshing and that keeps one going. The other thing I would say is that I realize that this is a marathon. God willing, if I'm given 5 years, if we're given 5 years, if I'm not recalled before then, we will achieve things in the 5 years, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so it's very important that people have realistic expectations of what can be achieved. As I look back in the last year, quite frankly, I don't feel that much has been achieved. There are some things, but I see the foundations being laid in the last year for what we can hopefully build on in the next 4 years.
I just want to say, to everybody in here, and indeed everybody that's watching us all over the world, that anybody who doesn't realize the capital that you bring to this job is not very wise. The city has a gift in you in terms of the reputation you have, the integrity you have, the capital that you have locally and internationally. And we really should be saying, David, you're not leaving this city until things are sorted out. But that being, by and by. My next question, David, to you, as I say this, the business community that's in here, for me, every time you say problem, I say there's a solution. Therefore, there's a business opportunity. Like you talked about the sewage issue, operating at 20% capacity. That's a problem. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for investment and an opportunity to create jobs. You say, as you sit here, a few things have been done. What has been done right now? What are you proud of having achieved in this last sprint that you've just had, 9, 10 months that you've had?
So let me blend your question in terms of the business opportunities, what climate we have to create here and what has been done. And my understanding, and as you know, I'm a lawyer, I've been in private practice in this city, so I have a very close link to the business community, both here and countrywide. I understand what the business community needs in the city. And in the last year, I think that the principal achievement is actually clearing through the morass of problems to identify what are the key goals that we need to achieve and address. What are the main problems that we need to overcome to create a conducive environment for business and therefore the people of the city to flourish in. And in the past year, we've identified, we have a broad consensus in this regard, that there are 3 things that we need to do. Firstly, water. The city faces an absolute catastrophe. As we speak today, our dams are sitting at 31% capacity. Our catchment areas have been ravaged by gold panners. So even if we have decent rains this coming season, we're not guaranteed that water will actually get to our dams. Nyamandlovu Aquifer is operating at less than 50% capacity. And the bottom line, as you know, Trevor, is without water, there are no schools, there are no businesses, there are no clinics, a city doesn't function. And so the number 1 priority has been to address water. And in the past year, we have devised plans. We have a short, medium, and long-term plan. The short-term plan is to rehabilitate the pipelines from Nsizwa and Chapez dams. There is water sitting in those 2 dams. It is our lifeline. If we rebuild those and reconfigure those pipelines, we will sustain the city through the coming months of drought. Secondly, in the medium term, we've got to build glass block Bapoma Dam. This was a dam devised in the 1980s. It has never been built. It's a no-brainer. Let me be more positive. When it is constructed, it will deliver 70 megalitres of the 165 megalitres per day the city requires. So it's a game changer. And in the long term, Waishengani, we applaud government for building Waishengani, but it's a long-term project. We'll only need it after 2040.
As far as water is concerned.
So medium term is the construction of glass block Bapoma Dam, which will dramatically transform the city's raw water requirements. And then long term is Waishengani. So that's water. And we have a very clear plan. We've made considerable progress regarding glass block dam. We have persuaded government that glass block dam is a necessity. We've worked very closely with a consortium.
And government is now on board as far as that is concerned?
Government is now on board. Government is committed to Zimwe entering into a contract with this consortium of civil engineers, water engineers, and the like. The big challenge, of course, is to raise $120 million US, which we need to construct the dam and to construct a 32-kilometre pipeline from the dam to our existing water reticulation network at Ngema. So that's the medium term. Long term is Waishengani, but we only need Waishengani if glass block is built by 2040. So it's a long-term project.
What's the low-hanging fruit that you've been able to deliver as far as water is concerned within the time that you've been in the office?
Well, Trevor, the reality is we have not been able to deliver. The situation in terms of residents has deteriorated in the last year. We are on 120-hour water shedding at present. In most areas, people are getting water 1 day a week. It's particularly hard in high-density suburbs, and that situation has deteriorated. So I can't...
That's criminal, David, that we're sitting here and we're talking about that kind of rationing, and there doesn't seem to be a crisis in the nation that Bulawayans are having to exist in this punishing environment. I mean, what do you have to say to that?
Well, I think part of the problem is that Cabinet is located in Harare, diplomats are located in Harare, and as you know, in Harare, Chivero, Darwin Day are full. They spilled this year. The fundamental difference between Harare and Bulawayo is that Harare has plenty of raw water which it can't deliver. We have very little raw water which we can deliver. But because the Harare dams are full, many politicians don't understand the catastrophic situation that we faced in. On Friday, I went down with councillors to inspect 2 of our dams, and it is frightening to see how low they are. Mzingwani is just a puddle. Lower and upper Ngema dams are going to be decommissioned by the end of September.
This is a crisis.
This is an absolute crisis. If we have another drought this year, or even a moderate rainy season, we will face even more shortages of raw water this coming year. And so I have a real sense of urgency that this needs to be addressed yesterday.
Absolutely. David, why has this issue not been declared a national crisis?
The council has been asking government for several years to declare the city as a water shortage area. The previous council in 2019 made that request. It was turned down.
On what are the grounds for turning it down? I'll tell you why I'm asking that question. Because the national water policy says Zimbabwe has sufficient dams to supply its current water needs, with the exception of Bulawayo.
Well,
precisely. So Cabinet knows. Everybody knows that Bulawayo is the only city that doesn't have enough dams, water bodies that required to be building. So why is the national government not allowing this to be declared a national crisis?
Well, I think in fairness to government, if I may, About 10
You've
years...
become a diplomat these days, but I'll allow you to.
I have to be, Trevor. You know, I often say to councillors, to the town clerk, that this is not about politics. When you run out of water, it doesn't matter what hue you are, it doesn't matter what political party you have, you die of thirst.
Absolutely.
And so we can't get engaged in politics. So to give credit to government, about 10 years ago, government decided to embark on the Gwaishengani project. And as I said just now, it's a good project. It's a magnificent dam site. It will have a massive yield. The problem is that it is a massive engineering project. Not just to build the dam. In fact, the bigger engineering project is to transport water 257 kilometers up a head of 600 meters. It's a huge engineering project, and it requires a massive amount of power, electrical power, that we simply don't have at present. But the problem is that with government focused on Gwaishengani, the message was sent, for example, that we don't need to focus on glass block, and we don't need to address the deficiencies in our existing, for example, water purification works down at Nema. Because the goal of government was to build Gwaishengani, to build a pipeline 257 kilometers, to put in a water purification works in Cowdery Park. And that was the plan. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened within the time frame that government envisaged. And so it is now urgent that we deal with Plan B. And Plan B has to be a glass block. You know, the frustrating thing for me, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a water engineer. When I came in here, I discovered that actually a feasibility study had been done for glass block in 1988. That's when the city fathers determined that this was the next viable source of water for the city, and yet it hasn't happened. It now needs to happen.
It now needs to happen. What are the opportunities, David, for the business community that's sitting here? Your investors, this show is watched by a huge global audience. Investors watching you in New York, watching you in London, in South Africa. What are the opportunities for business in the crises that Bulawayo faces?
So let me just quickly finish those three goals, because it's very important to understand that you've got to create that foundation. You have to create an attractive business environment. And we can only do that if we can guarantee long-term water supply. Secondly, if we can guarantee adequate health and sanitation. And thirdly, we have to restore law and order in the city. And the principal manifestation of disorder is shown in the center of the city with the explosion of vendors in the center of the city, disrupting formal business, but also creating a very poor impression of the city. And that ties into litter, of course. As you know, if you want to attract a potential foreign investor into the city, first impressions count. What do they see when they arrive at our airport? Do they see a tidy city? Do they see a city where you can turn on the taps and find water? Do they see a city which is respecting its own bylaws? And so that's our understanding. Unless we get those basics correct, we will not attract investment. And that's what we need to do first of all. But let me move on to the nub of your question. You come from Magwegwe, you know the beauty of the city, you know the strength of its infrastructure, you know its position, its proximity to Botswana, its proximity to South Africa and Zambia, the fact that the railway headquarters are here, that we have railway lines to Harare, to Lusaka, to Francistown, to Johannesburg, to Maputo, all come through this city. This city has this remarkable history that no other city has. This city goes back to 1840, when Mzilikazi came back here. When Mzilikazi came here and established his kingdom and his capital here. So it has deep roots. In fact, it has some of the deepest roots of any city throughout Southern Africa. And so we have to build on that unique position, that history, that cultural identity, and project it to the world as a unique city that is worthy of investment.
And do we have opportunities for public sector, private sector, public sector partnerships? Do we have opportunities for build, operate and transfer in any of the infrastructure that we're talking about?
Absolutely. For example, let's take the glass block dam. We are working very closely with a consortium of the private sector to build that. Government has said it doesn't have the money available to build that. And so we are going to the private sector and the African Development Bank to fund that and to build it. 100% Zimbabwean, let me stress. The consortium is entirely made up of Zimbabwean companies, and we hope also to go to Zimbabwean banks to help finance that. Let me turn to the sanitation sector. We're working very closely with another company to rehabilitate 2 of our sewage plants. We have 8. They're all running way below capacity. And Azelby 2 and 3 is about to be rehabilitated by a private company where we've entered as a city into a triple P arrangement with that company.
What about the issues of infrastructure, the roads, communication, and any other issues, ancillary issues, activities that the business community here requires? What are you doing about those issues, if anything at all?
So let's talk about roads, and we need to look at the history. You know, in the past, when people paid their vehicle license fees, that revenue went to the respective city. That has been centralized. All that money now goes to Zanara. And we literally have to beg Zanara to let us have an equitable disbursement of the money which has been paid to them by the residents of the city. And unfortunately, the disbursements that have come to the city over the last few years have been way below what the city actually pays to Zanara. For example, if you look at what's going on in Harare at present, whilst it's wonderful for Harare, all the reconstruction of roads in Harare, the fact of the matter is that we have a minimal budget. But I want to be positive on this, Trevor. I want to come back to our team. We have a remarkable engineering team in this city. And a few months ago, in one of our council meetings, we agreed we're not going to rebuild whole roads with the limited resources that we have. We're going to try to maintain the existing roads. We're going to paint. And if you drive around the city, you'll see the remarkable job that our engineering team has done with limited resources to tidy up our roads. But we've got a massive amount of work to do. You know, we need $15 million per annum just to maintain the existing road network. Last year we got, I think, something like 800,000 payable in Zimbabwe dollars. So we simply are way short of the money that we need to construct our roads.
The other issue, David, is how much is this water budget requirements? How much is that going to cost? If you add it all up, back end of kind of calculations, I saw that you're expecting 14 million from the government. But when I looked at your numbers, 14 million is a drop in the ocean in terms of what you expect.
So let me explain the 14 million.
Yeah.
The 14 million is our short-term need. As I mentioned earlier on, we do have some water, but it's located in 2 dams. In Caesar, which is sitting at 43%, and Mchabez, which is sitting at 53%. Unfortunately, the pipelines from those 2 dams that connect into our water infrastructure distribution system are deficient. We don't have time to go into the engineering reasons for that. You might use some of the panelists later to analyze that. But the bottom line is that those pipelines are deficient, and we need the 14 million to upgrade and rehabilitate those pipelines in the short term. That, as I say, will secure the city's water needs, hopefully through to the end of a decent rainy season in the coming months. In the medium term, we need about 200 million. We need 120 million to build glass block, to build the pipeline, and then we need about another 60 million to rehabilitate the pump station at Ncema. I went to Ncema pump station on Friday, and I have to say I was shocked. A lot of the electrical switchgear is from the 1950s. The pumps down there are, in some cases, 50 years old. And that desperately needs rehabilitation. Those pumps are working at about 35% capacity. And so we need that extra 60 million to rehabilitate that pumping system, to expand the purification works, and also to expand some of the reservoirs on the outside of the city to cater for the extra water which will be generated by a glass block. And then, of course, in the long term, you've got Guayashangani. Government has committed itself to doing that, so the city doesn't have to look for the finances for that. But that's big money. The pipeline alone will cost about 400 million.
Wow. My bosses are telling me to wind down, but we're going to wind down as I ask you the following question. David, when I grew up in Magwegwe, we had a club which was run by the city council. We went to play ping pong, basketball, and it was a beautifully run place. We had a library in Magwegwe that worked. Mills and Boone and beautiful books would get them there. And I knew that when my father went to the pub in Magwegwe, part of the money that he paid to buy his beer was going to council, to fund council activities. Where are you with all those things?
Trevor, the reality is that many of these institutions are seriously run down. We still have libraries, for example, but their book supplies are not what they used to be. They're not kept up to date. Many of our parks that were distributed throughout the city are now run down. If you go to Centenary Park, for example.
Centenary Park breaks my heart.
It's a mere shadow of what it used to be, and the same applies to the parks in the high-density suburbs. When I talk about a myriad of problems, this is what I'm talking about. And that's why I come back to these three things: water, sanitation, and restoration of the rule of law. Once we've done that, we can then move to roads and parks and libraries to restore the city to its former greatness.
And finally, David, restore the city to its former greatness. But somebody's moved your cheese whilst you were messing up with the city. There's AI, there's technology. Your textile, which used to be what was the bedrock of the development of the city, you're no longer competitive with the Chinese. How are you going to reimagine the city, future-proof this city for an age that is knowledge-driven, AI-driven, where renewable energy is high up in terms of priorities? How are you going to reimagine the city going forward?
So our vision, is in two areas. Firstly, this should be the tourism capital of Zimbabwe. We have the beautiful Matopos, the unique Matopos, 30 minutes south of the city. We have the history I spoke about, one of the best museums in Southern Africa, incredible art galleries, incredible artists, a great airport that has increasing connections. We now have direct flights to Addis. We need to expand that to Cape Town and to Durban, for example, and ideally get international flights coming in here. But tourism can drive this economy in a way it's never been driven in the past. That's number one. Number two, to use your expression, reimagine. The rehabilitation of the railways is critical. The rehabilitation of the road from Beitbridge to Victoria Falls through here is critical, not just for tourism. There's a massive vehicle tourism market in South Africa that Bulawayo can primarily benefit from if that road is rehabilitated. But industry as well. If you look at Gauteng, for example, you will see that Gauteng is stretched to the limit. They're running out of water, they're running out of land. Here we have these huge industrial sites with railway spurs, and we need to have a drive to businesses in South Africa, manufacturing businesses in particular, to see whether they won't come to the city with its great airport, ideally once the railway and roads are working again, and use
we've got water.
And water. But finally, to reimagine. We need to think about the position, and this doesn't just apply to this city. Here we are in the same time zone as Europe, with highly educated young people, with A-levels, unemployed. Can we not challenge the Indian market in terms of IT and phone-ins and the like? You've got many of these Western companies that have these phone banks, we could transform some of our currently empty factories and fill them with young people performing those services. That's not where it ends. One other thing that we are working on is to use rubbish, to use plastic, to have a waste management facility that imports plastic. Do you know that Sweden imports plastic? We actually need to import plastic from Botswana, from Victoria Falls, from Harare.
To recycle it.
And recycle and use it for aggregate and things like that. So there are many things that we can do to revitalize this economy and totally transform it.
Since I'm talking to a politician, I'm going to take advantage. I know I've said finally, another finally. I know you love Cape Town the way I do. You actually took me to task one time when I said Cape Town was my favorite city. You said, how can you say that? Have you learned any lessons from the way Cape Town marketed its water problems? How they used their water crisis to actually use it as an opportunity to tell the world that Cape Town is a beautiful city. If you're coming to Cape Town, bring 2 liters of water with you, and it worked wonders. Have you learned any lessons?
Absolutely. In fact, last week we had a workshop for our councillors and senior management. We brought up a person from Cape Town who had assisted Cape Town through its water crisis. And the principal lesson that we learned is data. You've got to have accurate data so that you can explain not just the extent of the problem, but what needs to be done to resolve it. So we're learning very closely from Cape Town. Another way in which we want to learn is in terms of how Cape Town opened itself up to tourism. Do you know that in the last decade, 20 more airlines have started flying into Cape Town?
Wow. And
we need to reimagine, for example, our airport. There's no reason why our airport can't get further airlines coming in. And if we do that, not only can we boost the tourist sector, but we can attract potentially business investors to the city.
And finally, when you look back, David, supposing you are not recalled and you last your 5 years, when your 5 years is done, what do you want your record to look like?
Well, I come back to what I said earlier. I have children here and grandchildren. What I'd like to do is, in a certain way, similar to education. When I went into the education ministry, I found chaos from beginning to end. And we managed to stabilize the sector. We got teachers back in classrooms. We got textbooks for every single child. And in the 5 years, I don't think that I can take the city expansion very far in 5 years. We've got to stabilize the city. We've got to secure water. We've got to clean up our sewage system. We've got to create markets for the informal sector so that we restore the rule of law. We've got to tidy up the city. We've got to ensure that our bylaws are respected. And that's what can be achieved in 5 years. If we do that, we lay the foundation for the growth of this city going forward.
Wonderful. Shall we give the mayor a big pom-pom? We're going to have the stage changed for the panelists to come on board. But David, you are doing an awesome job. I just want to express our appreciation to what you're doing. And my prayer is that you don't get recalled. Because this is my city. I want the city to be run as efficiently as possible. And right now we've got one of those people that can do that. So David, we wish you all the very best. I know you are paid $47, but hang on to that. And your job at the legal firm, we wish you all the very best.
Well, Trevor, thank you for this opportunity. We really appreciate the attention given to the city. And I just want to end with one note. It's not about me, it's about a team. We have a great team team of councillors, a great team of management. And it's only together that we can achieve this. And so I'm confident with that team that we can achieve these goals.
Thank you, David.